Before we start, if anybody's looking to get extra credit for attending this talk, it would be great if you could just put your name in the chat. Also, it would be interesting to know what schools you are from, just so we could get a better idea of who is attending this talk. So if anybody looking to get extra attendance could just write their name in the chat, that would be great. We'll also give you an opportunity later if you can't do it now. And so without further ado, I am so excited to introduce our guest today, Michael Ioffe. Michael is a prolific entrepreneur and, very excitingly, a Lincoln grad. Thank you so much for joining us today, Michael.
Yeah, sure thing. Super happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So one of the reasons why we're so excited to have you is because you are a Lincoln graduate. What experiences that you had at Lincoln helped you the most later in life?
Yeah, sure. I think one of the really cool things about Lincoln, and I'm happy to, for everybody on the call, I'm happy to jump into more about my experience at Lincoln a bit later and what I'm doing now. But I think for me, the thing that was most impactful at Lincoln was, I think how supportive the culture was. Right. The really cool thing about Lincoln, and this is something that I didn't realize was unique until I left Lincoln, was that the faculty and everybody from the principal to the faculty to the students really supported just working on projects and experimenting with cool ideas. And I think that ended up being really beneficial for my development and my growth. For me, when I was at Lincoln, I initially started a nonprofit called tile.org. Which today is the parent organization of the Stumptown Speaker Series. And the really cool thing about that was that, it was just an idea that I had. And my, teachers and Miss Chapman and a lot of the faculty were really supportive of encouraging me to just experiment. And I think that that's the thing that you're able to do in high school that as time goes on, you're able to do less and less, is just experiment with ideas and have people support you no matter what. I think what I realized was that when you're a student, people are willing to help you and are willing to bounce around ideas with you and share resources in a way that they really aren't as much as you get older. And so I think the really amazing thing at Lincoln was that, just the level of support from faculty, from the local community, and from students was really unprecedented.
Wow. So yeah, Lincoln really truly does have a great community. And using this community, you started Tile Talks, which, as we'll go into later in the talk, is truly an amazing organization. But can you give us an idea of how you got the idea to start tile.org and how you started to grow it?
Yeah, sure thing. So one of the things that I was really interested in entrepreneurship and just the concept of starting things when I was in high school. And what I started realizing was that Portland has tons of phenomenal business leaders, but they were really inaccessible. So I ended up cold emailing about 100 local business leaders, trying to set up a time to chat, just because I wanted to learn. At that time, I don't know if Lincoln has an entrepreneurship class now, but at that point in time, Lincoln didn't have an entrepreneurship class, or didn't have an entrepreneurship class that was really accessible. And so I wanted to learn about entrepreneurship and just couldn't. And so essentially for me, the goal of Tile was to create a free venue for for conversations with entrepreneurs. And so what happened was I ended up cold emailing a bunch of entrepreneurs, and a number said that, hey, they wouldn't meet with me one-on-one, but if I got a ton of my friends together, they would meet with us sort of in a group setting. And I started realizing that there wasn't really a way for these live conversations to happen, kind of like the conversation that we're having now. And so essentially I ended up spending a few afternoons walking around downtown Portland, literally knocking on doors. So trying to convince local event venues to donate their space. And eventually we were able to convince Portland Center Stage to donate their basement once a month. And because I had sent all of those emails, we were eventually able to get, I believe it was 8 business leaders to come speak with us for the first 8 months of Tile's existence. And that's sort of how everything got started. It was literally us hosting free live talks in a basement with local entrepreneurs. And what we started realizing was that there was a lot of demand for the type of education that we were providing and for the type of experiences that we were providing, mainly because a lot of students had no idea what entrepreneurs did, and most importantly, the different paths that people took in their lives. Right? I think when you're in high school, especially, it's difficult to fully understand the variety of paths that you can take in your life and the variety of careers that exist. And for me, one of the reasons why I started Tile was because I just wanted to learn more about the different career opportunities that existed, and the different paths that people took. So essentially, we hosted that series, like first series of 8 talks. They were really successful. Obviously, there was a lot of ups and downs, and we can talk about failure and dealing with failure later on, maybe. But essentially, after that first series of 8 talks, I started realizing that what we had created in Portland could be scaled to other places and could have an impact elsewhere, right? Because we were hosting these talks for free because the event venue was willing to donate the space, speakers were willing to donate their time, and I realized that students could work to put these events together. And so that way, these events could be hosted completely for free because everybody was willing to pitch in. And so I ended up writing a manual and sending that manual to people around the United States, with no expectation that I would ever hear a reply or that anything would work out. But to my surprise, we started launching chapters across the United States, and then started doing more and more marketing and just talking about this concept of free live conversations with business leaders, and started talking about it more and more online. And eventually we scaled to about 450 locations in 50 countries. And so I started Tile when I was 15, right? Just as this sort of, free project in Portland. And by the time I was 18 or 19, we had over 400 locations in 50 countries. And so today, Tile is one of the world's largest entrepreneurship education nonprofits. And we host free live discussions just like this one all over the world. And so I think like 3 really important lessons from that experience. One is that if there are many problems, there are many problems in the world, and definitely many problems on a local level. And I think the difference with Tile and the reason Tile was successful is because I just took that one small step to email those 100 business leaders and to go around Portland and talk to event venues. And oftentimes that one small step will take you in a direction that you'll never anticipate, but it'll always lead you somewhere. So I think that that's one of the things that I learned, and that I would really recommend reflecting on is, when you're reflecting on the problems around you, even if a problem might seem very big, sometimes taking that one small step is far more impactful than you would imagine. And then I think the second major takeaway from Tile is that sometimes sometimes just sort of brute force works. And what I mean by that is, um, if I had gone about reaching out to business leaders one at a time, I'm not sure if I would have gotten anywhere. I mean, I think for me, because I ended up taking that plunge and cold emailing a ton of people and really going outside of my comfort zone, it ended up working out. And so sometimes just putting in a lot of effort, ends up generating at least some sort of outcome. And then I think that the last takeaway from my experience initially starting Tile, is that oftentimes achieving scale is easier than starting the thing in the first place. So with Tile, starting like those first 8 events, hosting those first 8 events was incredibly difficult. And was extremely stressful, and I felt like things were going to fail. But from there, achieving scale and sharing that once you've created a framework, even a basic one that other people can follow, sharing it and scaling it is actually far easier than you would imagine. And that's another thing that I realized is there's a lot of benefit to scale, but scale is easier to achieve than you would think.
Oh, so you were super successful at scaling this organization to a worldwide organization. But what did that day-to-day look like? Like, what was the manual you were sending out? Who are you sending it to? How did you expand to countries where you possibly didn't even speak the language there?
Yeah, sure. So I think the day-to-day life of an entrepreneur is far more boring than you would think, and I think far less exciting. It's essentially, I mean, and I'm happy to jump into what my day-to-day looks like now with Arist, and we'll probably touch on that a little bit later on. Also, for anybody who's on the call, feel free to turn on your video. Would love to see who's on here. And then also feel free to ask questions in the chat. I'm always happy to answer them as we're talking. But yeah, essentially, on a day-to-day basis with Tile, I would essentially dedicate about 2 to 3 hours a day to just, emailing people. It was mostly cold emails, right? So I would go on LinkedIn, find people that I wanted to talk to, or that I thought would be really great speakers. or I would email journalists to try to get press coverage for Tile, because I wanted more people to learn about it so they could attend. Or emailing teachers. I ended up emailing, I think, pretty much every single business teacher in Portland, trying to get them to get their students to attend. So we really did, I ended up just emailing everybody that I possibly could have. And my response rates were super low, right? First off, my initial cold emails were not super well written. So I learned a lot about writing good emails, which is, if there's one skill that you come away from this talk with, is learn how to write good emails. That'll pay off so much. But yeah, so for me, I ended up spending a lot of time sending emails to people, either to get people to come to the events or to get people to donate something. And I would get really low response rates. I think less than 1% of the people that I reached out to would respond. And then other than that, most of my day-to-day was especially once we got to scale, it was trying out different marketing strategies. So we would post about Tile on different social media platforms. We posted about it on Reddit, on Quora. We would try different marketing strategies. And by we, I mean me and one of my best friends, Riley Wilson, who I went to high school with. And and eventually, one or two of those marketing strategies started to work, and that's how scale started to happen.
And when you obviously tried a lot of different marketing strategies, what worked the best, and how were you able to implement this globally?
Yeah, sure. So what we found is that the thing that ended up working the best was posting about Tile on different forums and on Quora. So what we found is that just the build, when a lot of people were essentially what happened is we realized that there was tons of people interested in entrepreneurship, but very, very few people actually wanted to start a business, right? Because starting a business is really, really hard when you're a high school student. And so we realized that Tile was a perfect way for somebody who was interested in entrepreneurship to get more involved in entrepreneurship without having to start a business. It was sort of that intermediary. And so what we realized is that when people searched, how to learn more about entrepreneurship, we needed Tile to be that first result on Google. And so we spent a lot of time researching search engine optimization and trying to just get to that number one spot, primarily by posting on different blogs and posting on Quora and other social media platforms.
Yeah, well, that obviously worked really well for you. So after you started Tile Talks, you expanded it globally, and obviously it was really successful and continues to be. What did you decide to do after that? How could you follow that?
Yeah, sure. So essentially, one of our most successful locations for Tile was in the war zone in Yemen. And so my senior year of high school, and this is something that I'll never forget. My senior year for high school, I was in senior hall at Lincoln, and I got an email on my phone from one of our chapter leaders named Muhammad Al-Adlani. And so at that point in time, somebody would request to start a Tile chapter online. We'd send them our manual, and then we really wouldn't do anything else. Our chapter support wasn't super great. And even still now, our chapter, the way our chapters run is pretty autonomous, right? So Tile isn't involved at all in setting up the Stumptown speaker series, and the Stumptown speaker series operates sort of by itself, right? And so, we had sent Muhammad the Tile manual a few months prior when he requested a chapter, and I had no idea what was going on in Yemen. And so Muhammad sent me a photo in this email of 200 or 300 students packed into a small room, listening to somebody speak. And it was a Tile event. And that image blew me away because at that point in time, our largest event was 100 people in New York, right? Tile events, usually got 50 to 100 people to come. But people were just packed into this room in Yemen. And Muhammad included a letter saying how much of an impact this event had for the students that he was working with in Sana'a. And Sana'a is Yemen's capital. So that just blew me away, and I became obsessed with this with the question of why do so many people come to Tile events in Yemen? And what I started realizing is that in Yemen, their educational system has been broken for over 4 years. Because of the conflict currently going on. And if you don't know about the conflict in Yemen, I highly encourage you to read up on it right after this talk. It's currently the largest humanitarian crisis on the planet, and it's not talked about enough. And essentially what I realized is that because Yemen's educational system had been defunct for over 4 years, Students were desperate for educational resources, but they didn't have internet access, right? Only 27% of Yemeni students currently have access to the internet. And so online courses were not really an option. And so these live events that we were hosting, or that Mohammed was hosting with our help and guidance, were really the only educational resources that these students had. And that blew me away, right? Because you never expect that a random manual that you write, sitting in at Lincoln, ends up affecting students halfway around the world to that degree. And so I became obsessed with the question of how can we deliver more educational content to students in Yemen? And what I started realizing was that, video courses were not an option, right? So you can't send video courses. As an American student, I can't travel to Yemen. I can't send money to Yemen. I'm super, super limited in terms of what I can do. And eventually I realized that the best way to reach students in Yemen was by sending text messages, because even though nobody has access to the internet, almost everybody has access to a phone. And so that's where the whole idea of text message courses started. We started creating me and Riley started creating a text message course to teach entrepreneurship to students in Yemen. And what we eventually realized was that this course that we created was actually far more effective than online video courses. How many students, I mean, everyone here at this one has taken a video course, but how many students have taken like an online video course from Coursera or Udemy or like one of those online learning platforms? Okay, perfect. So those courses have completion rates of less than 5%. Video courses have very, very low completion rates and very, very low satisfaction rates as well. And like for me, like I've tried to take, and anybody who's finished a video course, I commend you. That's incredible. But I've never been able to finish a video course in my life. And so for me, like we started realizing that there was sort of this major gap, right? Everybody wants to learn. Everybody wants to learn new things. But the problem is that learning is often just not very human centered, right? Like if you want to take a video course, you have to go onto another platform, log on every single day and watch an hour-long video, which doesn't fit in super seamlessly with our day-to-day lives. And we just started realizing that there needed to be a better way to teach people, right? Where you could meet them where they are, which is usually on their phones. It's interesting, like with TikTok, we did a random survey of people under the age of 22. And what we found is that most people our age learn more through TikTok than they do anywhere else, which I think is an indication it's an indication of something, right? We learn best when insights are super condensed, made super, super clear, and delivered to us in a medium that we can that we can engage with. And so we realized that along with being really accessible, text message courses were also really, really engaging and had really high satisfaction rates, because we could just deliver learning to where people were. And so essentially from there, what happened was we started, kind of like parroting this idea to anybody who would listen, right? So we started, we just became obsessed with this idea of like, we could teach anything via text. And so we started going to at one point, we literally went to, so I go to school in Boston. We went to Harvard, drove over, printed out massive posters and just placed them everywhere on Harvard's campus. Like, hey, try a text message course, or like, hey, make a text message course. And what we started realizing was that there was no demand for text message courses in higher ed. There was no demand for text message courses in K through 12. There was no demand for text message courses from consumers, but there was a lot of demand for text message courses in corporate learning. And I'm assuming that nobody here knows what corporate learning is, because I had no idea what it was until like 2 years ago. But essentially, if you're an employee at a company, most of your learning happens from the corporate learning department of your company, right? So if I work at Apple, Apple has a corporate learning department that's responsible for teaching all of their employees. And if you think about it, these corporate learning departments are kind of like mini universities, right? I mean, they teach oftentimes tens of thousands of people, and they're responsible for delivering a lot of teaching and learning. The problem is unlike a university, if you're an employee at a company, you really don't have an incentive to you don't have a lot of time to learn, and you really don't have an incentive to learn. And so for us, what we ended up realizing is corporations needed a better way to teach and train their employees, and text messages were perfect for that because employees were busy or didn't have time or wanted, better ways to learn. And so now, Arist helps, Arist is a text message learning platform. So we help companies, create and launch and deploy text message courses for a variety of corporate training use cases. And since we launched about a year and a half ago, our clients now include Amazon, GE, DuPont. We're working with Apple and Facebook now as well. And we now work with over 20 Fortune 500 companies. And so like the sort of a few key lessons there. One is oftentimes solutions to problems that you don't know yet exist will come in places that you like aren't really looking. I think it's interesting because everything that's happened with Arist over the past few years, we just raised about 4 million in venture capital, and we now have a team of 9 people, and so things have been growing really quickly. But everything that's happened in these past few years is a result of me just becoming very, very obsessed with this problem in Yemen, and me paying attention to why these problems weren't being fixed. Which is what I encourage all of you to do. Like if you take some time to reflect on what problems you experience on a day-to-day life, and reflect on what you can do to fix them, I think that's like one of the most impactful and highest leverage things you can do. Especially because all of us on this call, come from a place of privilege where we have an education and we have an opportunity to make a difference, right? We all have the resources at our hands to impact the lives of others. And many of you have all of you in your own way have done that. But that's something that I would really encourage you all to do. And that's something that I think, ended up helping with Arist quite a bit. And then the other thing is like, as cliche as it sounds, I think not giving up, right? When, like with Arist, we spent 2 years, or like a year and a half trying to figure out, like, we were obsessed with this idea of text message courses, and we had no idea like who wanted to use it and where it fit. And just sometimes just being persistent and trying to figure out where your solutions fit is the best way to go.
Wow, so you have truly grown this company to enormous scale. But how did you like originally contact these huge companies? Like, do you just call up Google and say, "Hi, I have a product"? How do you like make these connections?
Yeah, pretty much. So essentially what we did is, I think with introductions to companies and with selling to companies, there's sort of 2 things to keep in mind. One is, and one thing that I'll note is B2B sales and like business to business sales is a huge industry, right? I mean, some of the world's largest companies only sell to other companies. And so what we realized was that, first off, if you're a student, people will reply to you. And if you say that you're a student, people will reply to you. So we would, sort of leverage the fact that we were students, and we would cold email people like at a ton of different companies. So I think one time I emailed the chief learning officer at Pepsi, like out of the blue, just cold emailed her and said, "Hey, I'm a student at Babson. I'd really love to talk to like get your feedback on this project I'm working on." And Pepsi is now an Arist client, right? So that's an example of where cold emails really ended up working out. I think actually the vast majority of corporate clients have come to us through cold emails. So that's been great. And the other thing is when you're building a product for anyone, it's really a series of progressive tests, right? Like you test your product with 10 people, and the first version of Arist was very, very basic. Riley would literally wake, like now we actually have technology where you can, build a text message course and it'll automatically send it to people. But the first version of Arist was Riley waking up every single morning at 6 a.m. and manually texting people. So it was very, very manual. And so, the first version of Arist was Riley texting like 10 people. We got their feedback. Their feedback was good. So we moved on to like a larger pilot of 50 or 100 people and some more automation. And then we progressively would like go up the ladder, right? And start like serving more and more people and getting their feedback and fine tuning the product and making it better. And then, this past year, we taught about 50,000 people. And then our goal for the year ahead is about 1 million. So like what you'll find is that, you always have to start small, but things start adding up very, very quickly.
Okay, so speaking of the process of like starting small how did you like build this program? Like, did you code it? Did you hire other people to code it? How did you like choose people to join your team? And how did you dictate what you yourself did versus what jobs you gave to other people?
Yeah, sure. So a few things that I'll mention. One is when you're starting a company as a high school or a college student, one thing that you have to remember is that oftentimes nobody knows anything, right? So when I was starting out, me and my friends had no idea what we were doing. But what we did have was the ability and the willingness to learn very, very quickly, right? We were willing to take on, for example, learning how to sell to companies, which we had no idea how to do, and we were willing to learn about that very, very quickly. And so what I would recommend is when you're starting a company or when you're starting a nonprofit or whatever you decide to start, um, when you're looking for co-founders, optimize for people that are willing to learn quickly and learn with you. And at the end of the day, the people that you work with are critical, right? I mean, I spend more time with my co-founder than with my girlfriend. And at the end of the day, like you have to really, really enjoy the people that you work with and the people that you spend time with. Because they are your partners in problem solving. And at the end of the day, entrepreneurship is just applied problem solving. That's the way that I would think about it. Like you have a problem, and entrepreneurship is just a way to fix it. I think for us, when it came to Arist, initially, neither Riley or I knew how to code. So we would just use third-party tools and services. For anybody who's interested, look up no code. There's tons of resources about how to build things without any code necessary. And there's like lots of really cool resources like MakerPad and like other resources to teach you how to build things without code. So yeah, initially we just did things without code, and then we spent I think 3 or 4 months trying to find somebody who would help us program like the first version of Eris. And it was kind of similar to that initial story with Tile, where I cold emailed 100 people. It was a very, very similar process. I would literally, to anybody that I spoke to, would just ask them, hey, do you know somebody who's a student who's interested in engineering and would like to help us build this? And I taught myself how to do basic design. So I had the sketches for the platform. Like I did everything that I could, but I just, I can't code. And eventually one of my friends, middle school friends, like knew how to code. And so like we randomly called him or I think we randomly FaceTimed him like one evening and we're like, hey, like, like nice to meet you. Can you help us build this? And then he ended up building the first actual version of Eris within, I think, like 2 or 3 nights. So I think what I would recommend, in terms of building the first version of your product, first, see if you can build something super, super basic without using external tools or without code. And then next, if you're building a software product, just ask everybody that to find a co-founder. Or to find somebody to help you build the product, and just be really, really patient. And actually that speaks to one super, super important thing that I like. I think this way of thinking has been really beneficial for me. When you're building a company or when you're building a nonprofit or whatever it is that you're building, your goal is to prove a series of hypotheses one step at a time, right? The first hypothesis that we wanted to prove with Arist was, do people like text message courses? Right. And we sort of like push away everything else and just focus on figuring out that one hypothesis. Once we proved that one hypothesis, then we moved on to the next hypothesis, which was, can people or will people pay for text message courses? Right. That was sort of hypothesis number 2. And the thing is like when you look at it that way, when you break everything up into like a series of small hypotheses, that makes starting anything so much easier because you're not trying to start like Google. You're trying to like solve a lot of these small hypotheses one step at a time.
Wow. So you mentioned like the importance of having people helping you out. Did you work with any like startup companies that were focused on helping you build your business? And what was your experience with them?
Yeah, sure. So I think in terms of people helping me out, and give me just a second. I'm gonna grab a drink of water. 1 second. Also, if you guys have questions, feel free to ask them in the chat. Like I'm happy to answer them as we're chatting. But yeah, so in terms of help, I mean, I've received like more help than I could, than I could ever ask for, from so many different people and places, and for which I'm extremely grateful for. So first off, the first people to go to are your teachers. For me, Mr. Hooper has been, one of my greatest mentors, and even though I never actually had Mr. Hooper as a teacher, he's been absolutely incredible in terms of giving me advice and guidance. And so in the very, very early days of Arist, I would go to Mr. Hooper and I would go to, all of my college professors, and just ask them for what to do next. Oftentimes because I had no idea what the next step was. And so, the great thing is that you all have tons of resources and tons of guidance, whether that's Lincoln alumni who are always willing to help, whether that's community members, whether that's, teachers. And you often don't know what experience people have until you ask. So for example, in college, I randomly found out that one of my professors had started and sold an education company. And so I was like, great, that's perfect. And so I ended up reaching out to him, and he he gave us tons and tons of guidance on starting out, and really really helped us build the foundation for Arist. And the really great thing is that if you just if you ask for help, people will give it to you, especially if you're a student. And so for everything from like raising venture capital and figuring out how to do that, to hiring our first employees, to figuring out like how to sell to companies, we relied very, very heavily on advisors and guidance. And the really cool thing is, I mean, the Lincoln community, for example, is very, very strong, right? And oftentimes, like for example, the co-founder of MySpace, Chris DeWolf, is a Lincoln alum, and so at one point, I emailed him and got connected to him, and he helped provide tons of guidance on how to start a business, because he's done that, and he's done it really well. And so don't be afraid to reach out to people, and don't be afraid to utilize the Lincoln community.
Wow. So one thing that you highlighted is like the importance of school. However, being in college and starting business, or being in high school and starting business, seems like it would be a lot. How are you able to balance these two parts of your life?
Yeah, sure. So I think, this is it's an interesting question, because I think my approach to school was a little bit unique, and what I mean by that is I I love learning, right? Like I genuinely really really love learning, but I think there's a difference between loving learning and loving getting a really high GPA, or loving like doing well on a test, right? Like those two things are different. And for me, I made a pretty intentional decision that I wanted to focus on doing really really well in school, but doing well genuinely, and genuinely enjoying the classes, and genuinely like for me, sort of genuine intellectual curiosity matters a lot. And so for me, what I found is that if I took classes that I really really loved, and just focused on engaging with them in the most authentic way possible, I could allocate 2 to 3 hours a day to work on tile. And I mean, it was definitely hard, right? I think the first especially junior year, when I was working on sort of the first version of tile, like the Stumptown speaker series, it was really really tough. I was doing IB at the time, and balancing both IB and tile was difficult. But at the same time, like I didn't do any sports, right? So I didn't do a lot of other extracurricular activities. So for me, like tile was sort of my one extracurricular activity, and it was a thing that I focused on a lot. And I think there's a saying that like whatever you focus on is what happens, right? Like if you spend a lot of time and a lot of focus on like one thing, it'll happen in some capacity, right? And so for me, like I would I would come home from school, would like do homework for a few hours, and then I would just like spend a few hours thinking about like, okay, like I want tile to go from here to here, how do I do that? And I would have one clear metric in my head, which was the number of chapters that we had, and that's all I focused on. And so as a result, when all you're spending like 2 or 3 hours doing is focusing on one thing, that makes it far far easier, right? Also, I want to answer Graham's question. So Graham had a great question, which is, what is your philosophy on of figuring out a business idea? The best types of business ideas are the ones where you're solving, problems for people, right? And where you're solving like real problems that people have. And so I think there's two really good ways to approaching business ideas. One is like asking people what problems they're experiencing. I know there's one founder. There's a really great company called Squire. They just raised I think 160 million, and essentially their founders just spent 2 years talking to barbershop owners, and they like literally all they did was talk to barbershop owners. Whenever they were in a city, they'd call up like 20 barbershops and talk to them. And Squire is a tool that helps barbershops manage their operations better. And it's now worth, I think, close to $1 billion. And essentially that's all they did is they just like really focused on solving the needs of this one very specific group of people. And I think that, if you don't have an existing business idea, right, like that's always a good way to go. I think at the same time, being comfortable with ridiculousness is also helpful, right? Like I think the idea of a text message course sounds really ridiculous to a lot of people, or sounded ridiculous to a lot of people when we started. And I think being comfortable with that is also beneficial, right? Think about like why do these things not exist and how can you make them happen? And then the third thing that I would suggest when it comes to business ideas is just paying attention, right? Like reading a lot and really paying attention to the problems that people are experiencing. Because the news covers sort of a surface level of the problems that people are experiencing. But if you really start reading and really start diving deep into problems, you'll start realizing that there's a lot of really straightforward solutions that just haven't been implemented yet because nobody's implemented them, right? So yeah, that's what I would recommend. And I'm happy to chat about that one-on-one as well. Two other questions. Do you need money to get well known? No, you don't. No. I think I mean there are plenty of entrepreneurs. I mean, including like plenty of people that I admire who've done really incredible things without any money. I mean, Tile and the Stumptown Speaker Series was started on a $50.18 budget. I like that was all the money that I had, and I spent it all on a domain name and registering as a nonprofit in the state of Oregon. And for 2 years, our only budget was $50.18. But what you'll find is that, especially if you're a student, there's a lot of people willing to help out for free and willing to donate their time. And as a result, you can create really great things without needing to spend or use any money. And then the last question is from Madeline. And she asked, what is a text-based class like? And what I'll do is I'll send a link to a text message course in the chat here in a second. Sorry, Alyssia, back to you for questions.
No problem. We're happy to take audience questions. I should have specified this earlier, but in our last 15 minutes, so in about 5 minutes, we'll just be opening it up to completely audience questions. However, if anyone in the audience wants to start brainstorming or has any follow-up questions, they can still feel free to put that in the chat.
Awesome.
Okay, so continuing on, so you've worked with some amazing companies. Do you have any specific examples of what it's like to work with such huge companies, or any funny or interesting stories about what these companies are like?
Oh yeah. So one of the things that was a surprise to me was how slow a lot of companies move. Like the level of, if you want to if you're working with large companies, the level of patience that you have to have is insane. One great example is we were working with the state of California on a disaster preparedness course to roll that would be rolled out statewide. And they were moving really fast. Like they were moving at timelines that they themselves had never, they told me that they themselves had sort of never been able to meet. And they were, they had a vested interest to move very quickly. But the thing is these large organizations are often so complex, and there's so many different people that are responsible for so many different things that it took us about 6 to 8 weeks to work with them to launch a 7-day text message course, right? So 7 text messages took 6 to 8 weeks to get written and published live. Right. So that, and the thing is like, that was a fast moving organization. Right. I mean, there are companies that we've been working with where they told us in September actually, this is a great story. So we sent an email to I can't name the company because we're under NDA, but it's one of the largest consulting companies in the world. We sent them an email 1 year ago, being like, hey, like, we'd love to work with you. Here's what we do, and like, here's why, like, here's how we can help. They sent us an email back 2 weeks ago saying, hey, thanks so much for the email. We'd love to chat. Like almost exactly a year ago. It was crazy, right? So sometimes you just have to be persistent. You have to send follow-ups, and you just have to be patient when working with B2B sales.
So you have truly learned so many amazing things from working with these businesses, but you're still like super young and Arist is still growing rapidly. What are you looking forward to in the future of this company and of just you yourself?
Yeah, sure. So first off, like, the battle is not won or lost yet. And what I mean by that is even though, like, even though we're growing fast and we have these clients, we can still fail as a business, right? And I think that's one really, really important thing to note is, failure happens, right? And like, companies fail for a variety of reasons. Oftentimes, those reasons are entirely outside of your control, right? If anyone's interested in a real world application of that, look up Robinhood and follow what's happening with Robinhood today. And so the thing is being really, really comfortable with failure is critical, right? Like, you have to be comfortable with the fact that what you're working on and what you're pouring in, like, all of the time that you're investing in something may not work out. So that's sort of one thing that I'll preface with. But for Arist, we're still at the very beginning of our journey. I mean, we have a firm belief that 80% of training should happen via text message or via a messaging format, or via like short form formats like TikTok. And so for us, we're sort of on a campaign to sort of sign as many companies up and scale up within as many companies as we possibly can. So that's our focus for the next few years. We're laser focused on just serving our Fortune 500 clients and helping them scale up. And at the same time, we haven't forgotten sort of our roots as well. So for every Fortune 500 company that we sign up, we actually donate the Arist platform to a nonprofit. And for us, that's really critical, right? Because we believe that companies have to be a force for good. And companies, if run properly, have to like impact everybody positively. I think for far too long, companies have been run in a way where they don't benefit every stakeholder, right? Where they don't benefit employees, where they don't benefit the end user. And so one of the things that we're trying to prove with Arist is that you can build a company that's based on kindness as a fundamental value.
Wow, that's really powerful. Okay, this is going to be the last question I ask you before we open it up to audience questions. So for everybody in the audience, you should start brainstorming. But just one last question. Do you have any last piece of advice that you want to get across to our audience today?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's a great question. I should have anticipated that. But I think two things that I would recommend sort of coming away with. One is first off, go easy on yourself, right? What I've noticed is, especially in this day and age, it's very, very easy to be hard on yourself, right? And feel like you're not making enough progress, or that you're not doing enough, like, grades wise or whatever. And one of the most important things to note is, sort of things will always get better, right? And things will oftentimes change, like, very, very quickly. So one example of that is, on March 31st of 2020, I thought that Arist was going to go out of business within a week or two. Like, all of our corporate clients, because of COVID, all of our corporate clients left within 2 weeks. And we were in a really, really bad place. Like we were like, we had no revenue, we had no growth, like, things weren't going anywhere. And so I was pretty bummed out, right? Because, like, this company that I'd worked on for over a year and a half, and for which I'd raised money from people that I really, really admired. At that point we had raised about 200,000, was going nowhere. And so for me, I was like, I remember that being a strong low point. And I was really hard on myself, and I spent a lot of time thinking like, oh, like what could I have done better and stuff like that. And then like 2 or 3 weeks later, like everything changed, right? And like I put in a lot of work to change things, but like at the same time, like a lot of things are so far outside of your control, and being comfortable with that is really, really critical. And things change on a dime, right? Right. Sometimes like, the worst day of your life can come, 2 or 3 weeks or 2 or 3 days before the best day of your life. And so just being patient and being comfortable with the ups and downs is really, really critical. And then I think the other thing that I would, encourage you all to come away with is the best things happen with people that you love, right? And anything that you create, whether you're creating a nonprofit or creating at whatever job you decide to pursue, right? Make sure that you're working with people that you love and that you treat people very, very well, because that's how good things happen at the end of the day. And at the end of the day, that's all that matters, right? As long as you treat people well, that things will work out.
Wow, that's an awesome note to end this part of the interview on. Next, we'll be segueing into audience questions. So anyone from the audience can feel free to turn on their mic or post a question in the chat. So I see one from Jake right now, and it says, "What was your biggest motivation that kept you going?"
Yeah, sure. So I think the biggest motivation that I've had that's kept me going is a pretty firm realization that if I won't solve this problem, then nobody else will. Right. I think that there will be situations in your life where you start to realize that that no one else is willing to solve this problem that you care so deeply about. And like for example, with when I was working with Muhammad and like his peers in the Yemeni conflict zone, I started realizing that nobody was going to solve this problem of making more of education more accessible, right? Like nobody else was going to do it, so I had to, because I, at the end of the day, like I really care about problem solving, and I really care about fixing these problems that exist, right? And so I think that that's the motivation, right? And I think the other motivation is I don't know what else I'd be doing, right? Like I really, really like what I do. I like, working with people that I like to solve problems that are interesting and important. And and it's a fun time. So I think that really helps as well. Madeline asks, you mentioned how important writing a good email is. What makes a good email? So what makes a good email is three things. One is being super succinct, right? The biggest problem that people make when writing emails is that they write paragraphs. We have a general rule at Arist that emails should be no longer than 3 to 4 sentences. If you can't explain, if you can't explain who you are, what you want, and why the person should engage with you in 3 sentences or 3 or 4 sentences, then you should probably go back to the starting block and revamp that email. One thing that'll open it up to all of you, if you guys ever want to send me an email and want me to help you edit it or give you feedback on it, feel free to do so. My email is michael@tile.org. Always, at any point in time, shoot me an email and I will get back to you. It may take me a day or two, but I'll get back to you with my thoughts and feedback. Was there a time where you wanted to just stop and go? Yeah, 100%. I think like every 2 weeks. I mean, especially when you're running a business that's at our stage where like and I mean at every stage business is bumpy, right? And being comfortable with the turbulence, it's like being on a plane, right? Like being comfortable with the turbulence is really, really critical. And for me, the best way that I found to not just stop and give up is to surround yourself with good people that are supportive, and also remember that even if things don't, the worst case scenario is never that bad, right? I think that's one of the things that I wish I had known earlier is the worst case scenario for anything really is, I mean, unless you hurt people, right? Hurting people is never okay, right? But unless your actions hurt people, the worst case scenario is never that bad. Like an example of that is, I was really, really worried about my grades in high school. And I was worried that, I wouldn't get into a lot of colleges. And what I started realizing was that, like, even if I don't get into like my dream school, there are still, a lot of other colleges that might be a better fit for me. And that's fine, right? The worst case scenario is, and even if I don't get into college, there's plenty of other opportunities to work, plenty of other opportunities to learn and grow in other ways. And so that's one of the things that really help is the worst case scenario isn't that bad. Is there anything Is there anything you think you could have done differently? Yes, certainly. That's a great question. I think the thing that I could have done differently is been a bit more patient. I think especially when Arist was first starting out, I was a bit impatient, and I think just like being persistent but being patient is a really hard but good combination to have. And then I think in terms of things I could have done differently is, um, yeah, it's tough. I think I'll have to get back to you on that one in terms of other things, because there's a lot of small things that I wish I could have done differently, right? Like in client conversations, I wish I would have mentioned like a certain thing. I think generally my continuous regret is being a bit more clear. Like clarity matters a lot, and being a bit more clear in terms of what I was building earlier on. But at the same time, like I think it's tough to have strong regrets at our age, right? We're all still very young because we're learning, and like messing up is how we learn. So, what is your greatest fear and how do you manage it? Um, yeah, that's a great question. Um, I think my greatest fear is, um, you know, is losing a level of work-life balance, right? And what I mean by that is it is very easy when you're working to get really lost in your work, right? And I'm sure a lot of you all experience this with school, right? Like when you're diving deep into school, and when you're ambitious and have things that you want to achieve, it is very easy to get sort of lost in the sauce, right? And so one of the things that I fear is that sometimes, like I want to ensure that my work never interferes with my ability to be a great friend, right? A great son, a great, a good person to others. And I think that matters a lot. So I think in terms of how I manage it, I think that's one of those fears where, because I think about it a lot, that it helps me sort of be mindful of it on a day-to-day basis. So yeah, that's what I would say on that end. How well is your business doing as of now? Um, yeah, I mean, it depends on your metric. So people evaluate businesses and their success in a variety of ways. Some people look at revenue, some people look at growth, some people look at money raised, some people look at employee count, there's lots of disagreement about which metrics matter and which metrics don't. I think for us, the metric that we focus on internally is whether or not we're delivering courses and solving problems for people. And so for us, by that metric, we've been growing the number of courses we've delivered every single month for the past 24 months. And we're seeing a lot of demand for what we're doing from our clients. And so, as long as we're solving problems, we think we're doing all right. How do you balance having two businesses? So yeah, that's a great question. So I actually currently am not involved with Tile. I passed, when Arist started to grow, I actually passed Tile on to an external CEO. So I'm actually no longer involved with Tile for the most part. This is the first time I've attended a Tile event in a year or two, so which is great. So I'm super happy to be here, and thanks for having me. But yeah, I found focus to be very important. So with Tile, actually going back to that question about regret, one of the regrets that I had with Tile is that I just didn't focus on it more, right? And that I didn't focus on the specific problem that we were trying to solve more. Because I think with Tile, we reached a point where we were trying to do sort of too much at the same time. So for me, in terms of balancing, I don't. I just focus full time on Arist. From 8:30 in the morning to like 7 or 8 p.m. I work on Arist, and that makes my life a lot easier. Are you hiring people personally? If you are, what are some interviews or traits that impress you? That's an awesome question. So I do hire people personally. I interview every single person that we hire at Arist. And the three things that we look for in a hire are: one, whether or not they're willing to learn, right? Two, whether or not they treat people kindly. That matters more than anything else. Because we have actually we have had situations where we had two people. One was a little bit more talented than the other, but the other was far kinder and far more willing to learn. And we ended up hiring that person because those two traits matter a lot. And then three, we look at something that we call clarity of thought, right? And that's someone's ability to take a problem and think through it clearly, right? That matters a lot. Because the thing is in a startup and in life, right? Things are often uncertain. Like things you will, especially in business, you will be thrown situations that make no sense. Somebody, for anybody who's familiar with the Robinhood situation, somebody was joking that, being the communications director at Robinhood is probably the toughest job in the world right now. And the reality is, every role within a company will at some point experience a very, very turbulent situation, right? And so someone's ability to learn quickly and handle those types of situations and take responsibility, that's very, very critical. And those are the skills that we look at. So yeah, those are the three things.
Really quickly, so we're running almost over time, so we can still take 1 or 2 more questions. But if anybody is on a time budget, if anybody wants to get extra credit for this class but hasn't put their name in the chat yet, we would appreciate it a lot if you could do that now. Michael, you can continue. I just wanted to let.
Also, I'm happy to stick around. Like I have nowhere to go, so I'm happy to stick around and answer questions and help however I can. So so two more questions that people ask. Do you offer internships? We're currently on a pause with offering internships, but if you think of a way that you can contribute or want to chat with us about summer internships, shoot me an email, and I'd love to chat and talk about our internship program. I'm going to put my email in the chat here. And then Daniela asks, how do you ask that? If you ask someone, are you willing to learn or are you kind? They will probably say yes to get hired. Yeah, so that's usually not something that we ask. That's usually something that we try to learn about through their interactions, right? So and it's tough. It's an imperfect science and there's or an imperfect art, and there's a lot of hiring is difficult. But I think for us, we try to gauge whether or not that person is sincerely kind, right? And whether or not that person is sincerely interested in learning. And usually what we find is that, we talk to someone's references. References are very, very important. Someone's references will tell us whether or not they are genuinely kind and genuinely willing to learn. And then we look at their work history, right? And what we find is that people who are genuinely curious, genuinely kind, and genuinely willing to learn will usually, have really, really interesting side projects that they've worked on. They'll have a really comprehensive work history that'll indicate sort of a positive working traits and behavior. And so that's usually, those are usually things that we try to pick up in our conversation with them versus ask directly.
Great. If there's no more questions, this can be the official ending of our talk. Thank you everybody for coming. Michael, if you could stick around afterwards just to talk, that would be great. Thank you so much for joining us. Your talk was truly amazing. You're truly an impressive person and a wonderful speaker. And thank you everybody for showing up, and happy end of semester.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming, guys. It was awesome meeting you all.
Thank you.
It was nice to meet you, and your story is very inspirational.